Because, my goodness, it does need improving.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the noble Lord Stanell, with whom I served on the Built Environment Select Committee. Can I declare as interests that I was until August last year a member of the board of the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation, also that I own and live in a leasehold flat in London, and indeed own nominally a further leasehold flat as a will trustee, though I have no financial interest in it. Concerning the block of flats in which I live, we exercised some time ago, in fact I think we were the second block in the country to exercise the right to manage when that legislative provision was introduced. And it has worked extremely well for us. It's persuaded me very strongly that the control of the management of the building in which you live is the solution to many of the problems that leaseholders have experienced with their freeholders and their managing agents. Now, I'm slightly baffled as to why the noble Lord Stanell suggests that this is something that only the middle classes can attain to. I have to admit, we probably fit the description in terms of our residents that Lord Stanell set out in the block where I live. But I don't understand why he says this can only be done by them. We, of course, don't manage the building ourselves. We interview and appoint and periodically change a professional managing agent, a property agent, but the point is that agent reports to us and is accountable to us financially and in terms of the decisions that are made. And the structure also allows us to put a long-term plan in place. In fact, I believe the legislation requires us to have a long-term plan, a 10-year plan, which has made the prediction of service charges very much easier. So I strongly support those parts of the bill which are aimed at giving residents greater control of the management of the blocks in which they live. But I will just say that if, as is not the case where I live, if there is profound disagreement between the residents of a particular property, shared property, on questions concerning heavy expenditure, there is no legal structure that is going to resolve those issues satisfactorily. What we need to do is bring about a change in human nature, and that, I'm afraid, is probably beyond the capacity of your Lordship's House. I am concerned that the right to manage provisions as they currently exist appear not to extend to local authorities, even where the property is held outside the housing revenue account. And that is a point that I may well wish to probe further in committee. I'm also concerned about the idea that landlords will not be able to recover their legal fees from tenants as a result of disputes, and how that impacts particularly on right-to-manage companies and on any other form of tenant control that might be adopted as a result of this bill. It would, in effect, make it impossible for the right-to-manage company to take action against delinquent leaseholders because they do not have the resources or the deep pockets of these freeholders to take legal action, take the risk of being left with large legal bills. So I would like to propose that, to probe that further as well. Now, where the right to manage is not actually exercised, then leaseholders do have to face the prospect of service charges being administered by or on behalf of their freeholder. And this, I think, is the nub of the matter. I'll come to ground rents in a moment. This is a much more important issue than the question of ground rents. And I certainly take the view that freeholders should not be making a penny out of service charges. There is absolutely no justification for freeholders to do that. I mean, I would be perfectly happy if the bill contained a provision that prevented that from happening. I'd also be happy if the bill contained a provision saying that the total revenue to a managing agent was capped at a certain percentage of expenditure. And I don't think it requires, at least in this respect, a regulator to enforce that, because one could simply make such bills unenforceable in the courts, so that the demand could not be collected. Where I depart from the government, and I suspect from the majority, well, I think from nearly all of the noble lords have spoken so far, is in the provisions relating to the retrospective cancellation of ground rents and indeed of marriage value. This is an astonishing proposition from a Conservative government, I'm afraid to say. It clearly, and lawyers have said this, it clearly threatens to damage the reputation of English law in the eyes of both domestic and foreign investors. It makes a wholly unjustified transfer of wealth from one group of persons to another, estimated at 38, something like £40 billion being transferred from one pocket to another with almost no justification involved. And it will cause very serious difficulties for pension funds and other good faith investors. And I worry that there will be a tendency in this House not to engage properly with this issue, but to say it should be left, leave it all to the European Court of Human Rights because they're going to sue anyway and let them sort it out. I think we have to engage with the equity of this issue, with its fairness and with its justification, and I have very great difficulties with it. I come to the question of estate charges. I haven't heard until today the expression fleaseholder charges. I think we're talking about the same thing. These were brought up with great eloquence by the noble Baroness Lady Thornhill, and I share her outrage, really. Here I refer, the reason I mentioned my former membership of the board of the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation is that Ebbsfleet is being developed on this basis. The residents in Ebbsfleet will be paying charges for the maintenance of common utilities, parks, roads, things like that, amenities, which would normally be borne by a council. And I think this is the next great scandal approaching. I've actually said this in the House before. This is the next great scandal approaching the housing market. But I don't think it's the case that one should present this, as the noble Baroness did, as a case of sort of wicked mis-selling by developers, because it is in very large measure attributable to councils who are simply resiling from taking on their duties. They will accept the additional council tax that is generated by the new properties, but they will not take on the responsibilities for maintaining those common amenities. So I think there are two parties at least involved whose attitude on this needs to be addressed if we are to correct it. I come then finally to two lighter points. The first is, could we all agree to drop this use of the word feudal as a term of abuse? First of all, not everything about feudalism was bad, despite what the noble Baroness Lady Finn may choose to correct me on. But much more importantly, the law of property in this country was totally reorganised by the Law of Property Act in 1925. And that made provision for a form of tenure where property was shared, and it gave it the name leasehold. That might be an ancient name. They got rid of copyhold and all the other stuff that existed. That might be an ancient name. But the fact of the matter is that leasehold as we know it today is not even 100 years old, let alone medieval. It is the creation of 20th century law. And I think we should recognise that and stop trying to demonise it by making out that it comes from the Dark Ages. And finally, my lords, very briefly, although this last point may be thought to stretch the scope of the bill a little, I shall be making a personal effort at some point to try and persuade the Secretary of State that it is time to amend the building regulations so as to make starling nest boxes, nest bricks, compulsory in new developments.
My Lords, I wish to follow Lord Moylan